Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Rule Your Mind podcast. I'm excited to have my special guest, a good friend of mine, Dr. Diana Sanchez Lira. She's a psychologist, a public speaker, as well as a business owner, an entrepreneur. She owns a couple of gyms in Las Vegas. But her and I met back in probably maybe 6 or 7 years ago working with the military. And I'm really excited to talk to her. We always have good conversations. So, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me, Diana.
Yeah, of course. Good to see you, Robert, as always.
Good to see you too. Yeah. So, tell us a little bit about like your background and how you got into psychology and all the work that you do and trying to help individuals, achieve their fullest potential.
Yeah, of course. So, as you said, I'm a psychologist. I originally got my PhD to see clients, to see people individually, and to help
Yeah.
people achieve their best self, whatever that was, right? And then as I went through, I ended up working with the military, which is how we met. And
Yeah.
when that happened, it opened a whole other world to me, which was performance psychology, which I had done very little of. We have, um, I had some touches with it here and there. I had interns that had been really interested in it, and I had
Yeah.
supervised and whatnot. But I didn't really get into it a whole lot until I started teaching for the military. And then from there, I started consulting with organizations, individuals,
Yeah.
firms, and then I went on to purchase a couple of businesses and then use it in my own world and running the business. And then I continue to see clients. And I also had developed a class called the Psychology of Excellence that I taught at the university. And that class really made me understand that people are so hungry on a manual on how to be really healthy in many aspects of our lives. I mean, everything from our gut health to our health and relationships goes back to our psychology and um, how we interact with people and ourselves and behavior. All of it, to me, all of it comes back to psychology. And I didn't realize how
Right.
hungry people were for that information until we worked with the military, with you, and then teaching that class. And so it's really taken me down that road.
Yeah, I love that idea or the way you phrased it, the a manual, right, on how to 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 live a healthy and meaningful life, right, and how do you get the reach the objectives that you have for yourself, right? And that manual, and we're not right, we're not born with that. I know
Mm-hmm.
you and I had many conversations with working with the military of like there are times where it feels like some of these skills and concepts that we teach are very basic, right, or very like oh
Yeah.
wow. And then you realize not everybody is practicing those or even aware of them. Um,
Yeah.
are there trends and
We talked a
themes that
lot
you
about that.
see? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, like,
Yeah.
tell me how
And just
you
like
came to
thinking
understand
like that
that. Yeah,
everyone knew it, right? Like that was
right,
one of the conversations that we had that also really triggered for me and made me understand how important the topics that we teach her when because I'm in a bubble, right? I'm in a bubble with a bunch of other psychologists, performance coaches, like, and I'm thinking, oh, everybody's reading these books, or everybody, because everyone I run into is reading these books and
right,
and studying it. But people are doing other things, are busy with their lives and their own careers and their own interests, and many people don't have the same interests we have, which is like reading on the
right.
self, right? And so um, even I remember having a conversation with you that changed me, that was about the repetition, because I would think, oh, everyone already knows this is boring, why would we even talk about it? I felt like I wasn't offering anything new. And you
Right.
we had a conversation where you talked about, well, people remind you of things and it still helps you, right? And it's like, yeah, it does, and I guess that's okay to offer that.
Yeah. Yeah, the one of the sayings I live by when as a teacher, right, but as also for myself is the everything that's ever needed to have been said has been said already. The problem is people aren't listening, right? And so and I catch myself all the time thinking back to advice that my parents have given me, when I was
Mhm.
17, 18, 19 years old, and now as a 40-year-old man, like, oh yeah, that's what they were talking about, right? And like they said it, I heard it, I didn't pay attention to it. I didn't act on it, right? And then now I have a different perspective, and so now it makes more sense for me, right? And so I think that repetition is great. A lot of the my perspective of like the self help book industry and all the things that we like to read, they're not that different, right? Like, I mean, there's some subtle
Mhm.
changes, some stories, some perspectives that might be nuanced, but that's really it. And I still appreciate it because I think they, although they are very similar in many cases, they potentially have the opportunity to strike somebody at that moment in their lives where it resonates, right? And so that one
Yeah.
story from this one author may not make sense, but this other author and their story and their way of teaching it makes perfect sense, And that's one of the things that you have taught me. Not that we're just giving praise back and forth, but was that being more nuanced in the way I'm describing things based off the population, right? Like I having worked with the
Mhm.
military for so long, I've developed that culture of like, this is how these stories resonate with people. And then you go into the corporate world and they're like, that's a little too aggressive, right? Like people
Yeah.
don't want to hear that example in that story, right? And so, yeah, I think the art and ability to pass the information on that we're teaching, um, is important. Obviously we're going through the elephant in the room is what's going on in the world, right? Like we have still we're going through a global, pandemic where a lot of social unrest here in the U.S. You know, I describe it with a lot of my clients as a blanket. It's this constant like pressure, whether we are living
Mhm.
it, direct day to day, or whether it's you know, just kind of in the periphery, right? Like we're going to work, we're still doing our stuff, but it's always in the back of our minds, and it's just this constant pressure. And you know, my biggest concern is wherever you fall on the spectrum, there's tension, there's potentially anger, there's
Mhm.
frustration, there's uh, emotional responses. And my big thing is I want people to learn to manage themselves within there because it'll help them not just be better for themselves, but be better for the people around them. What are you seeing with either clients or even people at the gym? Some of their concerns or some of any patterns and trends in terms of how they're viewing the world or what they're dealing with.
I think that for me, one of the something that has come to the forefront is basically how do you manage and lead a team when not everybody agrees, right? So, for
Yeah,
example, in the Black Lives Matter movement, um, we've taken a stance as a company, Orange Theory has, and
right.
we've put things up in support on social media. We did as in our, and that's 3 stories that I own or we
Right.
own. Um, and having some pushback from my leadership and how to deal with that in a way that's not divisive. I
Right.
came from a place of in academia, there is much more education, and that leads to a viewpoint that is a little more united. Not always, but when
Yeah.
you're with these PhDs and these masters, like it's a little more united. And what I'm realizing in corporate America is that that same education hasn't happened, and it is divisive. It has been, and so how do I? For me, it's been okay. How do we deal with the pushback in a way that is not divisive, in a way where someone's not asking to be educated, so they're not wanting that from me necessarily. However, I am part of the leadership, and I'm also pushing the message of the company that they may not agree with, and so how do I do that in a way that is loving and compassionate and professional? And so,
Yeah.
I've had some difficult conversations about even just starting, that conversation with being able to note that there's a lot of pain in the world. And now that pain is going into the relationships with my managers, and it threatens to divide us rather than to unite us. And that just setting out a goal for me has been really important, to be very vocal about that goal. Hey, my goal is to unite and to have discussions even if we don't agree, but to have them in the right place at the right time in front of the right staff members. I would have conversations with my managers more than I'm going to have it with my staff members that are at the front desk and busy.
Mhm.
Um, but anyway, just that I think is a huge challenge right now for corporate America and organizations and leading. How do you lead when we are very passionate about, um, for me, it's a continuation of the civil rights movement. And,
Yeah.
how do I, what do I do when I'm getting a lot of pushback when people are feeling that they're being marginalized, although marginalized means that there's a history and a system, but that they're feeling invalidated, I should say.
Yeah.
And how do I validate that person in a way that brings people in? Because I'm not going to change everyone's mind. It's tough.
Yeah, yeah. I love the your idea of putting the goal out there and naming your intention, right, of what you're trying to do. Right, we're trying to unite. It's coming from a good place of solid intentions, and that recognizing that it might not have the outcome that would be nice, right, where we all get along and we all agree. That's not
Mhm.
how the world works. But I think it's important, right, and I think that sometimes gets lost is that I see it even before all of this craziness that's going on in the world is with clients is that they often don't get their message across, not just the words, but the actual intent and their why they're trying to do something, right? And so I think that's hugely important to making sure that the message, not just the language is heard, but that the intent is felt, right? And so that language of empathy and hearing people and trying to be heard in the right tone, right? And so my
Mhm.
wife always tells me it's not what I say, it's how I say it, and that means I probably don't say it the right way a lot, but the idea is because she keeps saying it to me. um, but it's that idea, right, is knowing what the intention is, and then that can help with the discussion because you can dig down a little bit uh, as you go through that. So
and
that's
and
one
these
thing is
discussions
naming
are
it.
having across the discussions are happening across lots of different places. I mean, I think online is the worst place to have them, like
Yeah,
people just can leave comments and there's no tone and there's too much anonymity, right? But
yeah,
people are having it with their friends or their neighbors. And, how do we have those conversations in a way that is respectful, maybe spread some information that can be useful, but
right.
people feel validated in the end in some way, shape, or form, and feeling that
Yeah,
ultimately respecting each other is our goal,
right.
right?
Yeah, the going back to your what you talked about earlier with people feeling invalidated, right? Like I think we teach a skill we're using a via character strings, right? We use that kind of tool. I know you've used it before, and I think still continue to use it. And it's a tool that I use. And one of the ideas is there's a shadow side to all these strengths that we have, right? Like we have all these good things, but sometimes we overuse them. And I think this is an instance where we are overusing in some cases, right? Where we can potentially be overusing one of our strengths where we're invalidating the values of others, right? And that's really where uh, we're not being empathic, right? We're not listening and trying to understand people's perspective because it has almost nothing to do with what's actually happening. It has how people are interpreting what's happening, right? And
Mhm.
so trying to understand that, you're one of the more empathic people that I've worked with. What are some of your, if you have any tips or strategies to be empathic and show care and concern, particularly when you have passion, right? Like you have a particular thought or sentiment about something.
Yeah.
How do you like take a step back and actually, have those difficult conversations without getting riled up?
Well, I tell you, it's easier when it's not family.
Right? Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you're a leader in a leadership position, right? So any organization where you're a leadership position, um, when I was younger, I used to be more impulsive, right? As you get older, I think that that's one of the great things about being older is you have less energy, at least for me, and so it leads me to be less impulsive than I once was.
Yeah.
And so I can see that, you know, the to go back to like the goal, okay, what's the goal of my organization? I certainly don't want someone walking around angry. It's not going to help me. It's not going to help the employees. It's not going to help anybody. It's not going to help my, my customer. It's not going to help anybody. So, I think about that goal ultimately. And then from there, I can really know that like, I want this person to feel good at work, maybe not comfortable, because sometimes we're uncomfortable and I'm okay with that, right? All of us are
Hmm.
uncomfortable sometimes, and that's where we grow. But also learning, okay, where is my place? If I'm going to reach this goal, what do I have to do to, where do I have to place myself in order to reach that goal? Is it as an educator, and how much of that can I do and reach my goal? Is it, as a a CEO who's going to listen to you and actually going to ask you about your opinion? And is that going to reach my goal? Right. And all of these are yeses, right, to certain degrees. Because I also want my people who are working for me to not say things that are insensitive, which they don't know are insensitive, right? So saying things like, oh, I don't see
Hmm.
color. Well, I actually, it's really dangerous for me, even as a business owner, beyond my own passions or beyond my own, for me, it's dangerous as a business owner for them to walk around and say those things and ultimately, get some of my members riled up. So some education is necessary, but then
Hmm.
some validation is necessary, or else this person's not going to follow me in other things. They're just not, right? Because they don't feel heard, so they're not going to want to follow me, and they're not going to want to stay with me. And hiring a new person is expensive.
Yeah.
And those relationships have been built and they're valuable, and that person is valuable beyond this one topic. They, which is I'm not saying it's a small topic, it's a huge topic if you know me personally. It is to me. However, they're more than that one thing. And we can't get to our goals as a company if I don't, you know, hold myself back, some measure myself in different ways. It's not going to happen, you know,
Yeah.
because we're going to be so different. Even, we have a presidential election coming up. We're going to be so different in so many ways. And I just can't just like spill my emotions all over the place. To me, that actually you're being overly emotional. You have to
Mm.
hold your emotions as a leader and lead people. If I can lead them 1 inch this way, then I have to do the 1 inch this way. And that's all I can do. I would like to go a mile that way, but I can't. You have to be realistic.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
make people afraid and say whatever I want them to say, but that's not real, right? And none of that's authentic.
Right. Yeah. 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 I appreciate that. I appreciate that. The managing the emotions piece, right, is one thing that I think, in general, we don't get taught. We're not taught in schools how to manage emotions or manage, and self-regulate, whether that's through, all the different activities. And the big one that we espouse is physical fitness, which obviously is a great stress reliever, but it's too limited from my perspective, right? It's there's a time and place when you do
Mhm.
that, and when you need it, if you're in a difficult conversation and you need to take a step back mentally and manage yourself, you can't just start doing push-ups, right? To kind of de-stress, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's an area where I've spent a lot of my leadership coaching, my performance coaching is on emotional regulation, because I think we have strategies for a lot of other things, for focus, and not that people can't be taught those things, but I think the emotional pieces, where I've seen a lot of struggle, and for myself included, I'm not above that. I have challenges as well with that, right? I
Yeah.
personally have recognized in myself that my go-to emotion is frustration, or or some, maybe even a slight anger. And even when I'm scared or sad, I express it as frustration, right? So, like, which that doesn't help, doesn't serve me well, particularly in personal relationships, right?
Yeah.
If I
Because it's
see my kids
confusing.
and I'm scared, yeah, it's very confusing to them. Like, I'm scared that they're going to get hurt, right? They're jumping on something or running around with something, and my intention, right? Going back to my goal is to keep them safe, and my words come out like a caveman, right? Very rah, and so that doesn't always go over well, right? And so, yeah, so, it's, I think not just because it's a personal struggle, it's what I've seen with the populations I work with. And I also work with a lot of, male dominated industries, right?
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Pro
I mean,
sports. Yeah. Yeah.
one of the things I
Go ahead.
realized working with the military was that I started to really understand why men blow up. Like I got it. They told me, you know what? I get it now. You're allowed maybe, let me see, two or three emotions. You're allowed to be happy, but not too happy because it's not masculine.
Right.
So happy,
Right.
you're allowed to be angry, and you're allowed to be neutral. And that's it. And if I was only allowed those three emotions, guess what? I would blow up on someone and I would be violent. I would be physically violent. I know I would.
Yeah.
It's not enough options. And so
Right.
I really realize that like men are quite limited by society and how we teach them that they're allowed to express themselves. You're not allowed to be scared. You're not.
Yeah.
There's this wonderful study looking at men and their relationships throughout their lives. And it's so beautiful because it's a bunch of audio recordings of like there's these little boys and they follow them and they follow their relationship. And when they're young, they tell each other they love each other. They say, I love this person. I would never want to live without them. I can't imagine not being with them. And as soon as they hit high school, they no longer are allowed to talk about their friend like that. And they start to lose the connection between them because they can't be as emotionally intimate anymore. And then it talks about just men growing older and not having relationships if they're not married. That close relationship is marriage, right? So men are happier if they're married. That's not necessarily true for women. And they also live longer if they're married. And part of the theory is, well, that happens because men don't have enough relationships, intimate relationships, emotionally intimate, whereas women are allowed to be emotionally intimate and have close relationships with many people.
Yeah. I mean, I've been married for going on 17 years, and it's hard to make friends as a grown adult, right? Like you meet
Mm-hmm.
individuals, it's super awkward, I've had times where my wife has gone out with her friends and I'm hanging out with the husbands who I don't know, and very awkward, right? It's like a first date,
Yeah.
but just and a bad first date at that. Don't have a
Yeah.
lot to talk about. Yeah, it's super, super weird.
I remember
And
telling a client to talk and he's like, men don't
yeah,
do that. And I'm like, what?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I've had many. I've put I've put myself out there, right? I would go out and like ask other dads, right, or your coworkers, like if they want to go grab a drink or something. And it's like it's very nerve wracking. Again, I felt like I was back in high school going and asking out, a girl on a date, right? And so didn't know what to say, didn't know what to wear. I got nervous about what to wear going out with them. Very strange, right? This conversation, right, is not how we normally talk about things, right? As guys, right? We wouldn't really bring these things up, but
Yeah.
it's the truth, right? And then learning to deal with that. I remember working with a soldier who told me after one of their trainings, he was like, why are you making me feel all these things? And I was like, uh, I'm not making you feel anything, right? Those emotions are within you. You having to deal with them and learn to manage them and understand them is what we're really trying to get after, is to build some self-awareness. What patterns or trends do you notice about how and why you behave a certain way? And particularly if it's an emotional response, what can you do about it? Particularly if you're not getting the goals or reaching the objectives that you have for yourself, right? And that he like just stood back and, nobody wants to hear that, right? Like that they have all these things that they're unaware of or how to deal with it, right? But it is the truth, right? And so,
And coming from another man, right? Because that was the other
yeah,
challenging point.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we're not used to talking to each other like that, so it's definitely different. I know you joke around with me that I don't have a lot of shame, and
Yeah,
so
which I
that
actually really like.
helps me. Yeah, which is advantageous for me because I can talk about what I just described, right? Like feeling like I'm going out on a date with a guy that's a friend and feeling these butterflies of like, is it going to work out? Are we going to be friends or not? Uh, and and I don't have a lot of shame around that because it's the truth, right? I'm originally from Miami, so I'm in a different city. I got married, and we moved to Massachusetts for me to get my go to get my master's. And so I left all my friends, and I had a very close knit friends back in Miami, kids that guys that I went to elementary school with, right? And now I'm in this new place. I'm married, so I was spending a lot of time, as newlyweds do, going out and having, trying to build that relationship and make that, grow into what we have today. So I didn't have time, right? Or I didn't create time or space to create these other relationships with other guys. And then we didn't have kids for another probably 5 or 6 years. So I didn't have access to other men unless it was at work, right? And then once I started having kids, that's where we started, interacting with other individuals, married
Mm.
couples, and we started hanging out, and
Wow.
it was super strange, and there was you can't pick those individuals, right? Like you can't it's
Yeah,
your kid's
you're
friend.
still
So
with
like,
your
oh, we're
kid.
going to this party because my kids is in their same class, and then you just show up, and it was very strange, right? And then you're like, my wife's like, oh, I love the wife, and I want to let's go hang out with them. And I was like, I don't want to hang out with the husband, right? And uh, so then you have to find that right pairing, right? And so I've been on several awkward guy dates for sure over the
And I
years,
think,
but
isolations are it's going to be a major problem for us because we're
yeah,
so mobile, right? Like you said, I think men would do a lot better, and maybe females too, to stay in the same place and live in the same place forever. Because you over those years, you run into people, right? You cultivate relationships, and
yeah,
even if they're your friends from middle school or high school, um,
right,
you cultivate those relationships. But when you move, it's so hard and isolating. And as a society, we move a lot, especially when you're pursuing career and you follow that career, and it's
yeah,
very lonely, and it's a health hazard because we're finding out more and more, right, that longevity has to do with relationships,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's
It
like the
was
number one indicator.
yeah. As I've gotten more into our field, right, and understanding some of those things more, and really researching, um, you know, relationships and dynamics, whether that's team dynamics or interpersonal dynamics. That's where I personally realized that for myself. Like I need friends, right? So
Mhm.
I very actively and deliberately went out and tried to develop friendships, right? And so now, fortunately, I'm lucky to say I've cultivated we have a small knit group of individuals that we get together, and our families get together, but also individually we were able to go and whatever, go have a drink or go just hang out, right, and talk, right, and so and then even within there, they're still building that intimacy, right? Within which again, guys don't talk about, but how do you build that friendship in a way
Mhm.
um, that's long lasting and sustainable and rich, right, and very fruitful. So challenging, but
And that used to
worth the
maybe happen
effort,
at work too, and people change jobs more
right?
than ever. They
Yeah,
used to
right.
work with
Yeah, I
someone
mean
for
most
years, stay with a company.
right.
And now we're moving
Yeah,
companies too much
lifelong
and
friends.
we're losing those relationships.
Yeah, and then I think obviously the virtual conversations that we're having and the way we communicate now in general, right, with social media, text message, even text message, right? Like it loses some of that. As you were talking earlier, a lot of these discussions about really um, sensitive topics and where there's a lot of nuance to our ideas and thoughts about something, having them over social media is a horrible place.
Yeah.
But just even
Yeah.
friendships, right? Like if you go take it back to our individual friendships, like having those conversations solely in that medium doesn't support and build a stronger relationship. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. So I know that you had some questions for me. I don't know if you really did, but you had said
I
so.
do have
I wanted to
one.
give you
I
some
had one,
space.
and I was really thinking about this. This is like,
Yeah.
it just, I think, like I said, like what I've realized is that people are really hungry for a manual, right, of self.
Yeah.
And one of the things that human beings struggle with is creating good habits. right? It's particularly hard. It can be particularly hard for some. Some habits are particularly hard for everyone, right? Um, so I wanted to ask you, like, what is a habit that you're good at, and what are the steps that you took to get good and to stay good at that habit?
Yeah. Um, I am good at relaxing, right? Like in finding mental space and finding my space for myself to recharge my batteries. Um, so I stress a lot, and so some of it I don't know if it's the chicken or the egg, right? Like I've always been anxious, and I've had to come up with strategies to deal with it, or I was very deliberate as I became more stressed,
What do you
right?
mean you're
But
anxious? Because you're not like anxious interpersonally. I mean,
no,
that's one of
no,
your strengths.
I worry a lot about the future. I worry about things that haven't happened quite a bit, right? And so, now that I have kids, and it's none of it is dramatic or drastic. It's just the are my kids growing up
Rumination.
well? Are they learning? And yeah, so I ruminate. My parents are getting older, so then there are times I get caught up in those things, right? But even as a younger kid, right? I going back to middle school, right? I was just always planning for the future, right? So goal setting kind of goes in line with that, right? Like so that's a skill and habit that I develop and cultivate. I remember in like fifth grade, I have notebooks where I wrote goals, right? And I would write them out and like plan. It was sometimes just for class. I've always been a checklist person, right? And that's something that's been very helpful to me. I don't know where I learned that from. My dad got into that much later, maybe when I was in high school, but I was already kind of doing that. So goal setting and stress and energy management were things that I've cultivated, and I don't ever not do those things, right? I always have either short term, long term goals, and then I have a daily practice, right? And that does change. So I don't just do one thing all the time. I play mental games. I'm a big fan of humor. So I like to watch short. Right now, my big thing is watching short YouTube clips of comedians or skits that I think are funny, and I will literally laugh out loud.
Yeah.
But so a few years ago, I learned about laughing yoga, and it intrigued me. And that kids laugh all the time, right? And they laugh like 300
Yeah.
times a day, and adults laugh like 30 times a day. And I just try to get above my 30 laughs per day. So I'm conscious of that and trying to infuse humor into my day. So I do mental breaks like that. Um, and so, breath work, meditation, mindfulness, to some days I need those things. Other days, it's maybe more of that humor. Some days it's just going out in nature, right? Taking a walk outside. If I'm going to go for a walk, I'd rather do it in a park than on a treadmill. But I'll stop
Mhm.
and I'll be the tree hugger person, right? I'll touch the trees. I'll grab the leaves. I'll, try to keep
Be
an eye out
present.
for animals and I try to be very present when I'm doing those things. So those are some habits that have served me well, right,
Yeah.
throughout my life. Yeah.
Because
How
most
about
people
you?
wouldn't know you have anxiety, or like that you suffer from
Yeah.
anxiety, right? And you're like, look, naturally my
Right.
body's very anxious. It's because I do
Yeah.
these things that you see that thing. But
Right.
otherwise you would be a ball of anxiety, and that's how we would know you. But we don't know
Right.
that
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we do
No.
so
Yeah.
well to
That.
mitigate.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up because I wouldn't even think of that. Like like that anxiety is something that I'm constantly aware of, obviously. But yeah, I don't know if I obviously you're telling me I don't present it to the world, and I agree with
No.
that, right? But yeah, I one habit that I don't do very well is sleep, right? Because I stay up ruminating, right? And so that's
I have
something I need
that
to work
problem with
on.
a lot of clients and a lot of people, and I think that whoever figures out the puzzle of why adults refuse to go to bed when they're tired, and we
Yeah.
see this in children, we see this in babies, we see this, right? Like, why is there this refusal to rest when you're tired at night? I think whoever really figures that out is like just gonna, like, change the world. I don't know why
Yeah.
that happens. I just know that I have clients
I
that I
don't
work
know.
with.
I mean, I see my kids do it, right? And I do it too, but it's obviously when you're seeing somebody else do it, like they're rubbing their eyes and they're like, I don't
Yeah.
want to go to bed. And, and they're like falling asleep and they're fighting it,
Why do
and
humans
it's
do
just like,
that?
it's a very good question that I definitely do not have the answer to, but I do it in my own way. Like I'll fight to stay awake to watch the ending of a movie that I've seen 1,000 times, right? Like
Wow.
I'm tired and I'm like, no, but I got to finish,
That's
Rocky Four, right?
amazing.
And
Ugh,
so,
I go to bed, so I
um,
don't understand it. I try to help my clients and I'm like,
yeah,
I tell them, I'm so sorry, but I don't understand. I know
yeah,
it's a natural human thing. Sometimes it has to do a little bit
yeah,
with trauma as well, or
yeah,
trauma helps perpetuate it. But it's also this
yeah,
human thing that some people
yeah,
have more of. And maybe we
yeah.
all had it at a certain point, but then some people just continue with it. And
I
I
have
don't get
read,
it.
well, I know that there's the, night owls and larks, right? As it relates to sleep, you have some people that just genetically, are early risers, go to bed earlier, and then you have individuals. Whether this is true or not, one of the reasons that I read that occurred was you had to have, when we lived in tribes and without civilization, somebody needs to stay awake to keep an eye out for the
Keep the fire.
for the lions. Yeah, yeah, keep the fire going, keep a lookout for predators, and then vice versa, right? You need the people to get up early to go out and get the you know the sustenance, right? And so whether that's true or not, I have no idea. But the idea is my wife is the exact opposite. Like I can't keep her awake for 30 seconds to watch like the last 30 seconds of a show we're watching, right? She just is passing out, right? But then she also gets up at 5:30 in the morning. And
Uh,
she likes to go work out in the morning. Like you ask me to work out in the morning, it's a nightmare, right? I mean I can do it,
yeah,
but I don't, I get up early because I have kids, right?
yeah,
And I have a job, right? If I
forced.
didn't have those things, I would sleep in. So for sure. How about you? What are some of your habits that you think you do well?
One of the things that I know people struggle a lot with is like exercising. And I feel like a little bit of a hypocrite saying this because I haven't exercised, but I haven't exercised because um, I'm pregnant and I'm not supposed to. But
Right.
because I have a high risk pregnancy, whatever.
Yeah.
But most of my life, I have exercised pretty regularly without much
Yeah.
support. And I think that's
Yeah.
a little bit, that's like a real struggle for most people.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to get support in different ways. I mean, obviously, like fine with you having a membership and, coming,
Yeah.
and I think it helps people to go. I don't need it, honestly.
Right.
I have access to it, so it's easy and fun, but I am someone who can work out by myself. But the way that I developed it was, I mean, it goes all the way back to um, a little bit of trauma, which I think helps sometimes. So I was sick for a lot of my childhood. I had terrible asthma. I
Yeah.
was in and out of the hospital almost every single month for years. And then once I got better, I said, I really want to be grateful for the body that I have now and that's actually working. And a way to do that is to exercise it, right? Take care of it because
Yeah.
I knew my body wasn't born really great. It was struggling. And so I started running cross country and track in high school, which a lot of people stop after, right? And I actually hated
Yeah.
it. I was terrible. I came in last every single meet, every single track meet. I was last. And what's funny is my
Yeah.
brother also ran track and he was first. I mean, he broke records in Texas and he was a great he ended up, he ran for Notre Dame but I was terrible and I hated it. But at the end of it, at the very, very end, it was very last race. I was like, well, I actually enjoyed that because I took all pressure off myself. I was like, what does it matter? It's the last
Right.
race. And I actually enjoyed it. And then from there, I started to get the runner's high, which I think happens to a lot of runners. And once I got the runner's high, it became a meditation for me. Then my husband said it the other day. He's like, you got kind of addicted to it. He's like, you
Yeah.
want your runner's high because I'm pregnant now and I can't run. I really want to run. And he's like, you want your runner's high, and I didn't really realize that was part of the reason I was really addicted. I know one part was also like I'd never want to be sick. I lived most of my life in a city that really struggles with obesity and really struggles with diabetes. And I just spent enough time in the hospital that I don't want one more minute if I can prevent
Yeah.
it. And so for me, it was
Yeah.
like every single day you create a habit. I created a place where I run, and I go run at that place, several times a week, and dedicate myself to not being sick ever again. And also to you feel really good, when you're running like that. And ultimately it became a meditation for me. And
Yeah.
at the end of something, you feel like I really felt like at the end of each run, I felt like, wow, I love everybody and I love everything and I want to do everything. Like, who doesn't want to feel that way?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
did get addicted to it over time, but I also did little things like I always marked off when I would work out. I have years of calendars marking off, and my goal was always 3 times a week. And
Right.
even if I didn't get to it, I would see, oh, okay, I almost got to it, or I surpassed it, or whatever, what have you. So keeping a tally, we know helps, and I did that for years. Keeping a habit of the same thing. Like I went at the same time and went to the same place. I didn't go to anywhere else. I knew where my foot landed at each place at the whole couple miles, and that helped, right? And then of course, like then when you get the runner's high, and that helps. And also, I never did it to. I think when we tag things to lose weight, oh man, I think you're not going to like it. I think it's the minute that you tell me that, if you told me, hey, you have to lose weight, that's the minute that I'm going to want to eat whatever I can't eat. And I'm going to have a difficult time exercising. I'm not going to want to do it. So I just
What is
connected it
that
to health.
about? Yeah. So that as a psychologist, you've studied this, right? Like, so what is that about that? Like, we're contrarian, right? Like, when we know something is good for us, kind of like the sleep thing, right? Like, why do we do that? But like from a health and wellness perspective, do you have any insight into why somebody may?
No, the only thing I know is that one time I purposely gained 20 pounds, like very quickly. I stopped running and I ate as bad as possible I had a roommate, to prove to my roommate that I didn't care about the way I looked, that I just liked myself and I didn't care if I gained 20 pounds or not. But after I gained it, I was like, okay, well, now I'm going to lose it. And the minute I wanted to like put myself on the first diet of my life, I wanted to eat bad. And I was like, wow, this is what people experience. And it really taught me that you cannot say, I'm not going to eat these things, or, to lose weight. Because the minute you say that, you just want those things. So instead, I think about, what do I do sort of naturally that has helped me maintain I have the same weight forever. Um, and that is, I think about health, right? I think about, I don't want to be in the hospital if I can prevent it. So what can I eat so that I'm not in the hospital? What can I
Right.
eat so that my
So you
child eats well? I think of the
right.
plus. I do not think of the minus, because if I think of the minus, I'm going to
Right.
want it.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I
and
tell
I
my
think
clients the
that
same
goes
thing.
back to the values, right? Having a solid values can help drive some of that behavior. Um, so yeah, I think that's valuable. It's understanding what those values are that really make us tick. And you seem to have found that early. Um, I'm always curious on the other end of the spectrum. You asked me about which habits I've used. Are there any habits
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
teach but don't necessarily follow up on or live
Yeah.
to the
That was my
fullest?
next question. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, like, what are some bad habits? I don't know. You can lead me in this one if you want to. 'Cause had thought of one last time we talked.
Yeah.
Um, I know
Yeah.
one
So
thing.
for
Oh, go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. Yeah.
No,
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 go.
go. Okay. So so for me, I would say the like pre-performance routines and prepping. Like, I know it's valuable. I am a procrastinator by nature, right? Like, and so I know I work hard, right? And I learn things, but I learn them in my own time, and I trial by error, right? Like, so presenting, right? I'm presenting to a new group. I'm presenting. maybe some nuanced material, I don't prep, right?
I know. I was
I
always
skim
shocked
it and
by
then
that.
I just go. And that's not a, I would never teach that to anybody. I would never say, hey, follow this advice. But,
The problem is it keeps
so
working
from
for
a,
you.
yeah, that is, I've been fortunate where it's worked out well. Like even when it's not great, it hasn't been so bad that I don't get asked to come back. Right. And so yeah, that's something that and the other thing is it's funny because there are times where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this, and I actually prep, and I see the difference, right? I see the difference in the benefit and the outcome, and I still, 90% of the time am not prepping, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, that would be something is that practice up front, right? So I use the game, so to speak, or the performance as my practice reps, which is not
Yeah.
probably what the coach would
Yeah.
want to hear, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's terrible. I remember you doing that. I'm
yeah,
like, what? Are we gonna
yeah,
prep? I would prep for hours. I was,
yeah.
it's fear. It was fear
Yeah,
driven.
that goes back to that shame thing, I think, particularly when it comes to presentations. Um, I, a lot of that stuff slides off my back.
Hmm.
Um, so how about you? Did you come up with one?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I struggle with that I tell people not to struggle with is the approval of others. I even think back, like now that we're talking, if we had, a room of 60 people and we're presenting to them, I would zone in on the one person that wasn't listening to me. Like everybody else could like clap or whatever. I don't care. But
Right,
I zone in on why is this one person not giving me approval? And it's
right,
terrible. I mean, I talk all the time about you don't need the approval of anyone. You don't have to prove anything to anyone except yourself. And that has helped me
right.
in many ways. However, I need approval from certain people at certain times that make me a worse performer. How are you going to perform on
Yeah,
stage when you're literally zoned in on the one person? I mean, I remember presenting a keynote to this, I don't know, anyway, and it was a stadium and, or like stadium seating, you know,
right.
and everybody was listening, but this one woman, and that's who I was zoned in on. It's like, I don't know what's going on in her life. It may have nothing to do with me. Or
Yeah,
maybe, okay, I don't
right,
have to be everyone's favorite speaker, right? That's
right.
fine.
Yeah.
But man, it was hard. It's hard for me to present because I'm one person, you know? And I had this
What is
conversation with
that?
my business partner yesterday.
Yeah,
Same thing.
yeah,
He was in a bad mood, and I could hear him on the phone. We got off the phone, and I was just like, I mean, he didn't give me approval, so I was like, oh, I was bothered by it. And I called him. I was like, hey, why are you mad at me? What's going on? He's like, I'm not mad at you. Was I grumpy? I think I'm just grumpy, but it's not about you.
right.
And I was like, oh, why do I need your approval? Who cares? And
Yeah,
I just do sometimes need the
yeah,
approval. I don't want to need it, but I need the
right,
approval of certain people at certain times,
right.
or I get stuck in it,
What
right?
what is that about that we do that, right? Like where you have these really confident people. I mean, sometimes I've worked with generals, right? Like people have been doing their type of job for 30 years, right? I mean, like decades upon decades, and they still, and not many, but some struggle with confidence, right? And they struggle with like, did I do it right? Am I doing? And he's like, you're a general. Like, how are you doing? Or even CEOs, right? Or professional athletes, and there's this constant need, for some of
Yes,
them.
yes.
And yeah,
That makes
what is
sense
that
to me.
about?
That makes
Yeah,
complete sense to me because I'll tell you, there was a part of my life where I got no approval, none, like no real approval. So I was in the hospital all the time. I did bad in school. I was not
right,
athletic. I was not cute as a kid. Like, when you're cute or not. Like I was not succeeding
right,
as a kid, and I knew that. And I didn't get any approval. So I learned not to need it, right? And I spent so much time like in silence meditating at the hospital that I learned to just, no one's going to know me except for me. That's what it taught me during that time as a kid.
right,
But I became more insecure when I got older and I started to reach some level of societal success, and people started to acknowledge me and praise me, I got addicted to their praise. And I remember the moment
Mm.
that it happened. And I remember now needing praise that I never needed before because I never got it. So I didn't care,
Yeah.
right? I sort of, came up from the back of the pack and I was running. Nobody knew I was coming. And then I started passing up. And in the back of the pack, I was quite comfortable knowing that nobody was clapping, nobody cared where I
Hmm.
was. In the front of the pack, I was like, oh, how do I stay in front? How do I stay in front? And I think that happens to the generals, that happens to your professional athletes. Now you're like, well, now my identity is tied to people approving me. And now other people have
Right.
so much more power from, over me than they've ever had. And that's
Right.
really
And we're allowing them to
disempowering.
do that.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's so disempowering. I remember the moment it happened, and I accidentally got addicted to it again. Like, not again, or I got addicted to it for the first time in my life, and like, oh, I want approval, and I want to be this person and that person. And then you have to go back to, again, like telling yourself over and over. I remember a boxer saying this. I can't remember his name, I'm sorry, but a boxer said, you know what? The way that I deal with like trying not to get addicted to that approval, he said, I just go in and I train and I go into my fights, and if people like it, great, and if people don't like it, great. He's like, he basically like refused to take the praise because he knew he would become addicted to it. And so,
Right.
I think about that sometimes, like, okay, if somebody likes it, great. If they don't like it, great. I can only be me
Right.
and I can only be authentic, and that's all I have. And that's okay.
Right.
And people are not going to
Yeah.
like me, and it's okay for them not to like me, you know?
Yeah. You and I had a lot of conversations that I always found fascinating when we worked in the military, and in particular, which I think dovetails off what we're talking about here, is the idea of shame and using, how leaders use shame, how we use shame ourselves to help us achieve our goals. Like one of my favorite shame stories is in Bogota, I believe in the 90s. There was a big problem with jaywalking in the city center, right? And there's an economic cost to jaywalking. From delayed bus routes to accidents and pollution because cars are more idle for longer, and so the city had calculated this cost and they're like, we need to stop this, right? So one of the ways they decreased jaywalking was they hired mimes to walk behind the jaywalkers and basically shamed them into
I
not
love it.
jaywalking, right? And so it wasn't in all parts of the city, but in the parts where they did that, I think jaywalking decreased by like 60%, right? Like it was a dramatic, uh, a dramatic decrease. And so, like obviously, so that's some evidence, anecdotal nonetheless, but evidence to suggest that shame is very powerful. Just like this approval and trying to seek pride and praise, those kinds of things. What, how have you seen that play out? Are there benefits to even using that beyond, Bogota and mimes?
To using shame. Unfortunately, you know
Yeah,
that I use shame naturally without thinking.
yeah, yeah,
I really
yeah,
do. And I do think shame can control groups of people, which can make it safer for other people. Is there a better way to do it? I don't know. There probably is sometimes, but sometimes it's just
yeah,
about, you know, I think there is a functional piece to shame in a community, right? Like, let's say, someone hurts someone else and someone else is like, hey, man, are you really going to do that? And they're like, oh, am
yeah,
I not supposed to? And like, it makes us really think. Maybe the difference here is, though, there's shame and guilt, right? For me, maybe guilt is a little healthier and I would promote guilt more than like, oh, I felt bad about doing that. Well, it's like, you should feel bad. That was bad, right? Sometimes I should feel bad
yeah,
about certain things. But
yeah.
shame says I'm a bad person, whereas guilt says I did a bad thing. So
Okay, I like that
I would say
distinction.
guilt is very helpful. We need to feel
Yeah,
guilty sometimes in order to not do bad things. But we don't need to feel shame, because if you feel I'm just a bad person, where am I going to go from there? That doesn't help me
right,
to be a
right.
better
Yeah,
person.
no, I love that nuanced distinction between shame and guilt, and I hadn't thought about that. It makes me think of what we started our conversation today about, in the sense that, the social media and the way we're communicating, and sometimes we're lacking tone. And I think one of the problems is, when we're interacting like that, is that we don't feel guilty, right? Or we don't experience an emotional response of me telling you something about you, and then you seeing my reaction, and then you having a reaction to my reaction, which is potentially some guilt, right? And we might not
Yes.
say, if because we want to avoid that emotion, we might not say those things, right? Or try to take a different approach.
Yes.
I just wanted to get what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I've realized as a leader, like in the organization, is that I'm realizing that there's a lot of when people are against, for example, the Black Lives Movement, that there can be some shame. They feel shamed, right? And that's certainly not going to help anybody. It doesn't help
Yeah,
me. I always think like it doesn't help me to feel better that you feel worse. What I would care for is some change, right? Like some change in the
right,
laws. That would be
right,
great to make it more equal and to get rid of some of that discrimination. That's what I care about. I don't care to make somebody feel terrible, right? Or to feel shame.
right,
Maybe guilt is okay because it's like, oh, we shouldn't be doing these things. We accidentally, or, we made these laws, and these laws are not helping to equalize the playing field. And they're actually really hurting some communities that ultimately doesn't help the rest of us at all. And
right,
so,
right.
I think getting rid of some of that shame within um, within the society, as we talk about Black Lives Matter, that if we get rid of some of that shame, then maybe we can move forward a little better or a little easier, or that even the transference of information could be more open and
Yeah,
not as resisted.
yeah. And I know, the shame, right? If people are experiencing that and they feel worthless, they may not feel like they have a voice, right? So then, I think
Hmm.
it's obviously systemic and societal, but there's also, and I think that's an epidemic unto itself, is people not having, not just self esteem, but value in what they're contributing to society. What I would call self efficacy, right? Um, just belief in their abilities for specific tasks, right? Not just global. And I think, so I'm working with an education company. I'm working with their leaders, and they teach fixed and growth mindset, and they're very good at passing this information on. But when you talk to the leadership, some of them are very young professionals, right? They're just like, these are their first jobs, so they're lacking some. You're talking about, perspective, right? Just from age. And I think I had, in the last 3 weeks, 15 conversations with 15 different individuals, and 10 of them, the number one topic was some confidence, right? And how do they view themselves, right? Within this new role, and how do they, manage people? Um, and so they're not anywhere close to shame, but they're not necessarily bringing their full selves to this role, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's an area where people can improve upon, for sure.
Yeah, and I think humility is a big piece of that, right? To be able to know that
Yeah.
all leaders don't know everything. None of them,
Right,
right? None of
right,
them, none of the leaders, and none of us know everything, and that's okay. We only know what we know. We bring that to the table, and I think you present that way, right? Where you're just like, well,
yeah,
I know this, and yeah, there's things I don't know. And I think once
yeah,
we accept that about ourselves, we can have a lot more confidence.
yeah. Interesting. So you're saying people should be
We
more
do it
like me?
naturally. I think I actually think that women could learn a lot from you. I like hanging out with men, some men like you, Justin, for that
Yeah,
reason, because you guys don't have shame, and women were really drilled in, my experiences, we're really drilled to have shame
yeah,
and to make other people happy. And so I love learning from you guys and watching you guys just be like, okay,
yeah,
whatever, you know?
yeah. I particularly last year and the year before, when my older daughter was in first, and last year she was in second grade, and when before this lockdown, when she was going to parties, you sit down, the kids are playing, and you're sitting down with other parents, and people would ask what I do. and there are times where I want to talk, and there's times where I don't. So sometimes I'm just like, no, I work with the military, and I do leadership stuff. And other times I'll expand a little more, and so there. I don't know. I think I
There are
ran
times you don't
through.
want to talk.
Yeah, there are times I don't want to talk. But several moms and more moms than dads, right? But it was almost 100% of moms kind of in that demographic. Their kids are now going to school. They're now, they maybe stopped working and they were just stay-at-home moms when the kids were really little. Now they have all this time on their hands. They don't know who they are, what they should be
Yep.
doing, right? And then it's
Yep.
creating a lot of, guilt slash lack of
Shame.
confidence and yeah, and
Shame. I am
shame.
not enough.
And right, yeah, and so like you said, I think women, may experience this more in that they like I don't have a desire. Never in my head I'm like, am I a perfect dad? Like I screw up all the time. My wife wants to like make things like perfect for the kids and
Yep.
everything has to be, and she like will like the way I describe it is she kills herself to make that stuff happen, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, yeah, dinner ain't happening. We're going to, the restaurant. We're picking up some food because that's what I have bandwidth for, right? Like that's what I can do.
Yeah.
She will, go and like prep this, great meal, right? And that's her way of showing love. But it's just, and I see these moms that I meet at some of these,
Yep.
kids' birthday parties experiencing the same thing. So, the big thing that I ended up creating a 30-day meditation, program where I would send them just daily, YouTube clips of different,
Perfect.
meditation techniques, right, to give them at least a mental break, and then trying to get them to hopefully that space allows them to think about themselves differently. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
Because Robert,
as you're
think
in
about
it,
it.
you see it. Yeah,
In the 50s, you got all these, right? You had in the 50s, you had all these like perfect housewives. They were dressed up, they had
yeah,
lipstick, whatever, and they had dinner served. But now, to me, it's gotten somewhat worse. So the 50s were pretty bad with all those images. However, now they don't have images from 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 like when TV used to run. Now they have
no,
images on all these Instagram with all this
yeah, all day.
lighting and all this makeup and all whatever of how perfect you're supposed to be. And look at all these things that this person did, but you don't really know their life and you don't really know what they're up to and what it's really back there. But anyway, this is what you're supposed to be. Way too many
Right.
images, very brainwashing. It's really terrible for women in that way. And that's why they feel so much pressure and never enough.
Yeah. 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 It's, and I would challenge people because I consider myself, I don't worry a lot about those things, but I do. There are times where I end up catching myself looking at whether it's, any kind of social media, right? Like Instagram or YouTube clips of, I watch a lot of YouTube clips of, and sometimes I'll watch stuff about working out or things of that nature. And it's just like, oh, strongman stuff, I should be able to do that. And then, you start comparing naturally, right? You
Yep.
do a lot of these
Yep.
comparisons. I don't think anybody's immune to it, no matter how
Nope.
confident or successful you are. I think if you engage in that, that's going to have an impact
That's
on
right.
you.
I
Yeah,
totally agree. And the
yeah.
research on
So
social media basically says that why social media makes people less happy, and the reason it does is because of social comparison.
social comparison. Yeah, interesting. Well, I know this has been awesome. I want to have you on again so we could continue these
Oh, I
conversations.
understand YouTube
Uh,
now.
yeah, good. There you go.
I didn't. I never
Uh,
understood it before.
you never said what it was. Yeah, now you get it. So tell people how they can find you and
Oh, sure.
if they had questions or wanted to learn more about you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's just my name, Dr. Sanchez Lira. And so that's the easiest way to see me, and I have meditations on there and a couple of other things. And then, of course, I have a website you'll find if you look me up as well. But that's Instagram's like the easiest way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And interesting, right? Like that's how we communicate, right? We're talking about social comparison,
Yep,
but that's how we get in touch with people. And there's pros and cons to everything, right?
that's
And
right.
so it's valuable. But I would definitely check her out. She's got some really great uh, tips and strategies. You post like short videos giving people uh, tips on how to manage themselves, how to
Yeah.
achieve their goals. So definitely check out Dr. Sanchez and Lita's Instagram page and follow her. But thank you so much. It's awesome
Yeah, thank you, Robert.
having you
Always
on.
great.
Yeah, I look forward to doing this again.
Likewise, likewise. Thanks for having me.
Take
Okay,
care.
bye.